Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Saturday morning Slice of Heaven at 11. And as per the last couple of weeks, we're doing Desert Island Discs. And with me this morning is Neil. Neil, who is probably quite a familiar face to many at St. Luke's, aside from the fact that you're 6 foot something as well, Neil. You certainly tower above me, as many people do. But for those who don't know you, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I've been worshipping at St Luke's on and off for about 22 years. I also worship at the Annunciation Church in Charminster Road with my Roman Catholic family, alternate weeks, which is pretty unusual. But that's why people may not see me every week at St Luke's or St John's. I do know St John's choir people because I used to sing in it years ago. But yes, so I'm a social worker, just retired officially, but doing some part-time work now. Been a social worker for 30 years, and I'm also a musician and have played music in churches and outside of that, Latin American folk music and things, as you'll find out when you hear my choices. That's probably a good pen picture.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Neil. And I'm sure in your retirement, you will probably be even busier than you were in your paid working life.
Yeah,
Great, great you can be with us. And you've got a great selection of music. Just to explain to people, it's the format of Desert Island Disc, although we're not actually playing the music that Neil has selected. We've got 8 tracks. That Neil will introduce and explain and say why he's chosen them, and then 2 other items. People get the automatically get the complete works of Shakespeare and the Bible, or a book of philosophy or of importance, shall we say. Plus a luxury item, but the luxury item isn't something that is alive, so it must be dead, stuffed, or something else, and we'll come to that in a moment. So, Neil, your first choice this morning is by Ralph Vaughan Williams and is Fantasia on Thomas Tallis theme. A good start. Just would you like to sort of explain why and what the history behind your choice of this is?
yeah. I grew up with a lot of racial abuse at school in my teens, and I certainly didn't feel like I was treated as being British, really. And so I started supporting the West Indies when they thrashed England in 1976, for example. I still do. So I definitely didn't have 1 ounce of patriotism in my body by the time I was 16. So this is a significant choice because I started listening to Vaughan Williams's music, first Lark Ascending, and it just made me, it switched on a little bit of, I was born in this country and this man makes me feel proud about that. And he was the first one, not the only link, as you'll hear a bit later, but he was the first person to make me feel as though I actually was British. So that's quite significant, really.
Mm.
And I love Lark Ascending, but I love the Thomas Tallis Fantasia even better. And when I first heard it, it just takes you into heaven, really, in my view. And I read about what happened when he first performed it at Gloucester Cathedral in 1912, and people didn't like it. You know, this is a thing that happens
Mm.
to composers when they, in their lifetimes, people didn't like it at all. They thought it was too brash and blah blah blah. Classic FM play it so often that people might get bored of it now, but it's just I can't get bored of it because it's unbelievable piece of music.
Mm.
And he had the gift of taking one line. I've sung the original, the Thomas Tallis piece in a choir back in the 80s, so that meant even more to me. And yeah, when you hear the theme that he starts with, it's the first line of the chorale piece of music in 1560 something, and
Mm.
then he develops it, and it's just yeah, goes out of this world really. And that's what Vaughan Williams did with a lot of things. Green Sleeves,
Mm.
folk songs. He collected folk songs from around the country with Cecil Sharp, and if they hadn't done that, English folk music would not have revived in late 60s, early 70s. So that's why it's significant to me.
Fabulous, thank you. And I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Certainly for me and my love of music, how often music comes from times of difficulty and adversity, and certainly for you know, personally speaking, music is my go-to when I sort of retreat into sort of myself, isolation, my time in silence, and things like this. I'm rarely without music, so no, it's that's a great track. So thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're moving on into sort of something. We start off obviously, as you said, in the 20th century, and a bit later now into the 20th century, and Stevie Wonder. Like to tell us what you've chosen of Stevie Wonder's and why?
Well, my sister brought home the album Songs in the Key of Life in 1977. She was about 14, 15, I was 17, and she put it on the turntable, as it was then. And I was instantly enchanted by. I'd heard Stevie Wonder's stuff, Superstition, various things that he'd done in the 10 years before that, but this was his crowning achievement in my view. And I also had a great kind of awe for Stevie Wonder, because, returning to my original theme, he has fought racial oppression in the USA to the point where he actually got the Martin Luther King celebration Memorial Day in late January through the President and Congress. So he means a lot to me in that sense. And this particular track, which is quite a long one, so be prepared if people want to listen to it. It's got some beautiful lyrics. Really, it's like a poem set to music, and it's describing as the flowers on in the garden grow. That's my love for you. You know, those sorts of. It's not trite. It's very beautifully written, but the music is just amazing, and it changes rhythm. That's one of the themes of my Desert Island Discs. I love variety of rhythms in music, in modern music. And I used to listen to in the 70s, before my friend took me to a Dr. Feelgood concert when I was 16. I used to listen to a lot of the normal Radio 1 stuff. So soul and the ilk from America was obviously all over radio at that time, so it certainly had an impact on me. And that's it's got a momentum, this song. It really has got momentum. And it reminds me of all the decades of work I've put into race equality over the years as well, which I have.
Brilliant. Thank you. And what I will be doing is I'll try to keep up to post YouTube links to all of these tunes. And if nothing else, if I can't find them, then there'll be a link to a Spotify playlist at the end. So people will have your whole 8 tracks to listen to. So thank you for Stevie Wonder and Az. And the next one now, as I said, as I said in the build up to this, off camera or off screen, there are some on this list that I've not come across, but I have certainly come across Leonard Skinner, fabulous artist. One of my favorites of his was Freebird. Now, this isn't your particular choice. Your particular choice is That Smell. Why is That Smell? I was trying to say that without laughing. Why is That Smell on your list of 8?
Okay. Yes, Freebird would have been the choice of a lot of people. And it's probably one of the most well-known rock anthems throughout the Western, if not all the world. And part of me was trying to keep people from not having to listen to 10-minute songs, because that's 12 minutes. This one's a nice short, about 4. No, joking apart. That Smell refers to chasing the dragon from a needle and a spoon, and it's about drugs. So they may have been drinking a lot of whiskey, which I think the Southern rock groups, Whiskey Rock and Roller was one of their songs. So they drank fairly heavily. but thankfully they didn't get into drugs in the same way as other bands did, and they were watching people around them sinking by the mid-70s into, you know, the morass of heroin and cocaine. So they wanted to do a song which kind of warned people about that, and they called it That Smell. So, you know, if you're chasing up the dragon and you've got that smell, be careful. You know, kind of anti-drug song really, but not in a very holier than thou policing way.
No.
But that's not the real reason why I love it. It's because dual guitar is the incredible guitar solos that they managed to do, and very soulful. Southern rock is about the white working class of the South taking on board what the black African Americans had kind of served up for them, really, in the previous 50 odd years of their blues and jazz. And you could feel that running through Lynyrd Skynyrd's music, and they did know local black Americans around them, and they didn't have an ounce of racism at all, the whole group. So they just, it was their homage really that they picked up on some of the soulfulness that blues and African American artists had done, and it feels through the music, you can feel it. It's kind of very soulful. And the guitar solos are really amazing. It's the link up between the two. You can hear the harmonies, and so it kind of is my, I mean, when I heard it, they just recorded the album Street Survivors, and they were touring the South of America, and yeah, they died, and 3 of them died in this plane crash, which stopped Lynyrd Skynyrd dead in its tracks, literally. So it meant a lot to me. I'd just been listening to the album when the news came through of the plane crash, and it's again well known throughout the world of any rock fans that they got back together, and I've got all the albums that the people have done, the group members, when they're reformed, but this one kind of reminds me of that time, really. And I think it would be, Lynyrd Skynyrd will be remembered forever, really, for the contributions they've made and the sadness around them. But this one's just a great song that they did.
Yeah, thank you. Brilliant. Brilliant. And I will certainly enjoy another listen to the 8 that you've selected. And on to the next one. Now I recognise the title, but again, I said to you earlier that I had a friend at school who was heavily into this group. The only version of this song, or titled the same as this, was by ELO and Olivia Newton-John, which is probably a little sacrilegious, and I should be probably embarrassed admitting that as well. But the song is Xanadu, and it's by Rush. So explain your choice here.
Well, in the summer of 1977, I was watching the Old Grey Whistle Test, which a lot of this generation wouldn't even have heard of at all. But it was something that I grew up with. I think it was every Thursday night. Bob Harris, the
Whispering Bob,
used to talk about like things so quietly you could hardly hear him. And he said, "And now we've got a clip of Rush." So I thought, "Who's this?" And I was spellbound by. They were playing this track, in fact, live on tour. And you know, and they had a white carpet and flowing long hair that was longer than my sister's at the time, and it was just incredible, quite captivating for me. So I went out and bought this album, A Farewell to Kings, which is what this track comes from, and then started listening to it, and it's just incredible. It's got synthesizer bass. They used to use, there was only 3 of them, and they used to sound like there was about 6, because they used to use bass pedal synthesizers with their feet and controlled them. They were way ahead of their time. Nowadays, you know, you see these people doing a track on their own, and they start a track off, and then it carries on playing because of digital technology. Before the era of digital, they would play these bass pedal synthesizers, and that would last, and they would control the keys and everything by their feet. And then they started playing their guitars and bass at the same time, which, if you hear Xanadu, you will think it's a group of about 6, but it's only 3 of them. So Neil Peart, who died in January from a brain tumour, starts playing incredible drumming. He's known as the world's greatest rock drummer, really. So you have about 15 changes of rhythm in this song, and it is phenomenal how they managed to do it. And you just, as you follow it, you think where they're going to go next. And it's actually, Neil Peart was the lyricist. The drummer was the lyricist for all their songs. And he was heavily into a woman called Ayn Rand at the time, who was a bit of a strange kind of right-wing philosopher. And they didn't stay long in this. They were only about 23 when they did this. So the words are a bit strange. And they're taken from, she used Samuel Taylor Coleridge poem. I think it's from The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, when he says the River Alph, and Xanadu is a kind of mythical place where and it was all done on heroin. He was using opium. Anyway, that's the roots of the song. And the words, again, don't mean as much to me as the incredible musicality of it all. And just, it's a really amazing song. It builds up to amazing crescendo. It's got a lovely guitar solo at the end. It's got everything that most rock fans love. And most Rush fans would consider this to be in their top 5 they ever did. And bear in mind, Rush played for over 40 years and did something like 25 albums. So this is an anthem to them, really.
Wow, that's brilliant.
That's the way I would say it. I saw them 3 times playing this, so lots of memories.
A good live band.
Incredible live band.
We saw them
really.
3 times, so I guess so they must have been.
Well, the first 2 was 1978 and 1980. Then there's a long gap of 31 years.
Wow.
And I saw them in 2011 with my sons at the O2, and they were still just as good as they were in 1980. So
fabulous.
Amazing group. They stopped playing about 4 years ago because of health. Unlike Rolling Stones, they realised when they needed to stop.
Fabulous. Thank you. Now I'm bound to get this wrong. I know that you have a love of many things, many Celtic things, right. Spirituality, prayer, and music as well.
Yeah.
Now, if I say Capercaillie, is that
Capercaillie?
Capercaillie, I knew you told me how. So Capercaillie, not a group I'd heard of, but the music is beautiful. Name and explain the track you've chosen. Right.
So Capercaillie is actually a black grouse with a beautiful coloured head, which runs around the forests of Scotland. There's no Capercaillies in England or anywhere else, just Scotland. So they felt that was a good name for their group when they started in 1987. And they're still going, but they don't do much these days, 30 odd years later. But Capercaillie, as a group, I first came across in 1988. And I knew about Irish folk music, but this is the first Scottish folk music I've come across. And they, over the years, have flown the flag for Scotland, Scottish music all around the world. They're known in all 5 continents. They have, amongst people, devotees of folk music. Karen Matheson, who's their lead singer, is very, very well known. She's a legend in Scotland. And Donald Shaw, who's the main songwriter, keyboardist, he created a festival called Celtic Connections, which is on the third week of January in Glasgow, which is freezing cold. And most people wouldn't have thought of doing it, but Donald Shaw pulled off an incredible, him and some others pulled off something amazing. Everyone from around the world wants to go there. When the tickets for Celtic Connections go on sale, just at the first day after the festival's finished, they get sold out within an hour.
Wow.
That's quite, I wanted to go, and I just, you've got to get in there very quickly. Yeah. So Capercaillie produced an album called Delirium, and in 1991 this was, and it was a mark of them blending jazz with folk. And a group called Moving Hearts did that in the 1980s. And the brother of the guy who led that group, Donald Lunny, his name is Manus Lunny. he moved over to Glasgow and joined Capercaillie in 1989. And by 1991, I'm sure it was his influence that you've got an incredible amount of jazz rhythms, synthesizers, and a real fusion of folk and jazz in this. And it's always reminded me that's what Scottish music has done. It's I watch BBC Alba. There's an unashamed advertisement for anyone who's got cable television. Channel 169, I think it is. If you want to get into Celtic music, they have incredible music programs of Celtic music from all over Europe. I mean, Brittany, Galicia, all sorts of places. And it's on about 3 evenings a week. So I just hit the record button and groups like this play. So it's a beautiful, and it's all done in Scottish Gaelic, by the way, Scottish Gaelic language. So Ran Namona, I wish I knew what that meant. I haven't put it in Google Translate, but they sing in Scottish Gaelic, and that's been revived since Capercaillie first started playing as well.
Thank you. Brilliant. And yeah, a plug for BBC Alba and Celtic music. On to your sixth choice. Now, this is a group that I have heard of, and I've heard their music. The group is Incantation, and away you go in terms of explaining your choice here.
Well, I first started playing Latin American folk music in 1985. I met some Chilean refugees in Liverpool when I first got there to study, and they were very warm-hearted people, and I'd picked up about Latin America and El Salvador just before I went there, and they invited me to the Latin American Solidarity Campaign local group. So I went there once a week all the way through the early 80s, and got to know the Chilean friends who were still friends of mine. Went up to see 2 of them in January. So we're talking about, 40 years after I met them. So they're good friends of mine. And they introduced me to the Latin American folk music. I used to watch bands come to play, and then I started playing it in 1985. I still do, 35 years later. I'm still recording stuff with my son Adash. We did one about 3 weeks ago, which I've been sending out on WhatsApp. So why Incantation? I suppose they reminded me of what I've done, because back in 1982, that's probably when you came across them, with what was very famous and on Top of the Pops. Cachapaya was the song they did for anyone who was around in the 80s. That one. Anyone of my age will probably remember them, because if they watched Top of the Pops every week, it was on for a few weeks. Yeah. And it was so unusual. And there were a bunch of British people playing Latin American folk music. So that's why I've chosen them, really. I've got a massive collection of Latin American music from the whole continent, from Mexico down to Chile. But through the mid-80s, they merged with 3 Chilean people, and Mauricio, Sergio, and Claudia, and they formed what I would say is a kind of super group in Britain, really. And this particular album, called The Meeting, which they described as the meeting of 3 Brits and 3 Chileans. This track is very vibrant. It's 2 quattros, which I play. I could have shown one on this if I thought about it. It's upstairs. It's a 4-string Venezuelan instrument, which is quite dynamic. Looks like a ukulele, but it's about twice as big and makes the ukulele sound very tinny.
Right.
So there's 2 quattros that start this track, and it's really power-driven, and has a change of key in it, and wonderful panpipes played in the middle, and it's just, and Claudia singing. It's all Canto del Agua means song of water. So I think it was their way of remembering the Venezuelan coast, I think. Because it's a Venezuelan beat. It's called joropo. And there's some people I know, Venezuelan community here, who grew up on joropo. And it's a very dynamic, fast rhythm. I can play it. but not as well as them.
Yeah.
So it kind of, yeah, it really does typify how I got into Latin American music. They were 5 classical musicians in the Ballet Rombe Orchestra in 1982. And one of them, Tony Hinnigan, if you listen to lots of film music and films like Titanic and what's that one about William Wallace? Braveheart. You'll hear a South American flute. That's him, and he's a multi-instrumentalist. He plays like 13 instruments, and he started with a cello, but he plays all of the Latin American instruments. And after Incantation finished, that's what he ended up doing, playing film music. So there you go. That's why I chose him.
Wonderful. Well, maybe this will spark some more interest in the parish, sort of Latin American music as well as Celtic music as well. And then your penultimate choice, which is completely new to me. Maybe I'm just showing my ignorance in musical terms, but by the Outlaws, called Green Grass and High Tides. So as your penultimate track, your reasons for choosing this one?
Well, the Outlaws are a southern rock group from St. Petersburg, near Tampa on the west coast of Florida. Florida has most of the southern rock groups, and they started in about 1974. They produced this song in an album in 1975. And it's quite country music they were playing in a lot. It was kind of half the album sounds country music until you hear this song. And they had 2 guitarists, like most of the southern rock groups, and they played harmony throughout it. And it's very soulful. It's beautiful lyrics, because they probably were the singers in this, Billy Jones and can't remember who's the other person. Hughie Thomason. Their vocals are very beautiful. A lot of southern rock was kind of raunchy Mick Jagger type lyrics, singing, but there's quite harmonic and beautiful singing. And you hear this track. I first I thought I'd buy this album and see what it was. I'd heard another track from their album previous album called Hurry Sundown, and I put this on the turntable, and it's like Freebird. It's very similar to Freebird. There's a huge change in tempo about halfway through, and then it's just fires on all cylinders with incredible rhythm and massive guitar solos all the way to the end. It's well worth a listen. Some of the rock DJs have played this on various, local radios. It's a bit of a cult song. And it reminds me of my time when I was lodging with an elderly couple in Greenford, and I'd arrived there. A friend told me I was on my own, just left home working in London, and didn't know anyone. And this song particularly, I was playing when they were out. I put it up full blast. So I don't know, they had a detached house, but I think the neighbours probably heard it. That way. It needs to be played very loud. They introduced me on my first evening there to 60 people in their church. And I started going there, Holy Cross Greenford, which was an amazing Anglican church, which set me up with my faith, really. And it was just an incredible introduction to that church. And the first day, you wouldn't believe how you could have that, really. You arrive somewhere and there's an immediate community for you to be involved with day one. So that's what it reminds me of. Twin lead guitars, melodic, change of tempo, great vocals, and memories of London, and when I first really, developed my Christian beliefs.
Fabulous. And in terms of your 2 non-musical items, as it were, your 2 extra items, the book you have chosen, which I know, and I know quite well, but maybe you'd like to introduce it and say why.
Celtic Daily Prayer, that's what it's called. And it comes from the Northumbria community up in Northumberland. I went there back in 2014 for a retreat, and I came across them through when I was organising Celtic services of a Sunday evening before your time, Michael. Viv is probably the person who remembers that most, who's still around. There was a group of people, about maximum of 11, but sometimes only 5 of us, who used to meet in the vestry. And I wrote various services, which, funnily enough, we're using as family evening prayer sometimes at home right now. And I'm glad I kept all the services. What I did was I searched on the internet for all sorts of Celtic spiritual material, and I found, St. Patrick's breastplate is probably the most well-known one, which at the moment is being prayed by quite a lot of people through this meltdown. But there's all sorts of prayers I found, all sorts, even the Lutheran Church of the USA, believe it or not, which is beautiful prayers and spirituality about nature and ordinary life. So that was how I came across the Celtic Daily Prayer, and the Northumbria community produce it and send it out. And it's probably, I should imagine, hundreds of thousands of people use it from all traditions. And it's got beautiful, it's a compendium of meditations, descriptions of the Celtic saints, and there's 2 whole years of daily readings. There's the morning prayer. It's like a monastic community, Northumbria community, and it's kind of virtual because they don't have monks, and they encourage people to be part of it wherever you are. And you can say the daily service, the morning one, the lunch, the midday prayer, the evening prayer. It's all in there. It's an amazing book, and it's got so much in it that I would be not bored, and my spiritual needs have been met within one book. They do refer to Bible readings. They're usually very short, so I could get away with not. The Bible will be given to me.
The Bible is one of your choices. Yeah, one of the automatic choices.
So it's a perfect combination, really, to be able to exist on my own on this desert island.
Brilliant, great choice. And yes, I've last couple of Mondays for my 11 o'clock slot, I've been using morning prayer from the Northumbria.
I've missed that, Michael.
The meditations are brilliant and inspiring. So yeah, I'm with you on that, and I will post a link to the Northumbria community as part of this as well, so people can have a look. And then your luxury items, which I guess for me would be of no surprise. And whilst I enjoy thoroughly listening to music, I am no musician. So tell us what your luxury item would be now.
Well, it's a classical guitar, and I suppose that's, I've played it since 1986. My mother had this guitar at home in the corner of our lounge, and I picked it up, tried to play it, and thought, my fingers hurt, I won't bother. So I didn't until I was 25. And I started playing Latin American music, and then I saw all these people playing guitar, and I thought, right, well, this is about time I learnt it. So my friend Francisco, Chilean friend in Liverpool, who I knew very well, came round and showed me how to play Latin American rhythms on it. So I'm sitting looking at one right now next to me. It's featured in my musical life ever since I started in '85, and yeah, it's something I would be able to play also in classical, because the strings are kinder to your fingers. And I'd make them last, because you can wear them out if you play them every day, so I would be careful about not playing it every day, just so the strings would last, because I don't think you get a set of strings along spare strings with it. Not allowed. But classical, because you can play everything on it, really. You can play lovely classical tunes, which I do know, and all the way through to pop and folk in between.
Yeah, and no reliance on batteries or anything like that. So
Exactly.
you know,
It stands alone.
a very good choice. Well, so we're on to your last track, and we're going back a few hundred years.
Yeah.
I think to sort of mid to late 17th century.
Correct.
And a composer by the name of Bieber. Would you like to introduce your last track, which we will listen to in a moment?
Well, Johann Franz Ignaz von Bieber was someone who I'd never heard of, and I understand why you wouldn't have heard of him either. It's interesting how some composers from the past have been forgotten. I was driving to work in the summer of 2003 on my commute from Bournemouth to Totton near Southampton to my community mental health team. And the composer of the week was Bieber, and they used to do it at 9 o'clock those days, and I was a little bit late. So suddenly this track they played called it's the Harmonia Ariosa, which is an interesting artificial harmony. You'd think, but yeah. So this was the last piece, partita, on this particular of the whole classical piece. So Bieber, it's like Pachelbel's canon. Everyone knows Pachelbel's canon, I think. You know the one that played very well known. This is better than Pachelbel's canon, and it's very similar. It's got the same thing played throughout, and it keeps repeating. So, but it's a lot better than Pachelbel's canon, and I do not understand to this day why Classic FM don't play it. Hopefully, when you hear it, you'll realise what I mean. So Bieber tuned his violin to a very unusual tuning, which a lot of violinists can't play. So this is a virtually impossible piece to play. And the Rare Fruits Council are the ones who I love best playing this. So I can suggest, even if you haven't put that as a link, that people should listen to the Rare Fruits Council. You can get it on YouTube, playing this particular piece, number 39. It's an amazing piece of music with period instruments, and it's Bieber had this. You could play harmonies, 3 strings at the same time, and that's why it produces an unusual sound on the violin. So it's early Baroque, and it's very. I love Baroque music. I fell in love with it when I first heard Bach, and this one sums up the best of that I've heard of Baroque music from 1620 to 1760.
Yeah,
that's my favourite.
Fabulous. Yeah, I first came across Bieber, so not in similar circumstances, but often in the days of large record shops. I would often head off to the classical booth, which was sort of, a soundproof room in the likes of HMV and Virgin and places like this, and a Bieber track was playing, and that encouraged me to ask what it was, and so I've got a couple of Bieber albums, so
there you go.
but
then.
I will have a good listen of the track you've selected again. Neil, for your 8 pieces of music and your 2 luxury items, the Celtic Daily Prayer Volume 2 and a classic guitar, thank you very much for your Desert Island Discs.
My pleasure.
Thank you.